At the end of the day, it's not about what you have or even what you've accomplished. It's about what you've done with those accomplishments. It's about who you've lifted up, who you've made better. It's about what you've given back. Denzel Washington. Welcome to Inspire Vision. Our sole purpose is to elevate the lives of others and to inspire you to do the same.
Brad Selig, how are you doing?
Hi, Dr. Doug. It's great to be here with you.
Hey, it's great to have you on the show. I really appreciate it. Now, you're heading out in California, right?
Just north of San Francisco.
Okay, great. So, share with the audience who you are and how did you get to the point that you're at and what motivated you to write your book, which is called Thriving?
I feel very, very fortunate with the life I've lived. One of the things I learned in high school was to be excellent. I became an excellent student. I've carried that through in everything I've done in my life. I went to Stanford Business School, and after receiving my MBA, I went to the caverns of Wall Street. I spent a dozen years with major firms and realized along the way that I really wanted to have my own firm. And it took a while to do that because it had to be focused. It had to have a clear set of principles. And I did that 3 decades ago. I have a fantastic wife, 43 years now, and 2 marvelous kids. And I've served on a lot of boards over the years. I've been a Scoutmaster, a Little League coach, and I like to say I'm a roll-up-my-sleeves environmentalist, doing conservation work as well.
Okay, and what motivated you to write your book?
Well, the original concept was that it was going to be a legacy project for family and close friends. But as I got more into it and I got feedback from some readers and a content editor who were saying, this is a big book and it really should be out to a lot of people, I switched gears. And I said, well, I want to make a published book. I wanted to have it be really high quality. And off I went. The process started 4 years ago. The book was published last fall, and it's getting amazing reception.
So are there any incidents in your life that really gave you that aha moment to write the book and to go into that direction? Because certainly the book is not necessarily about, if I can understand it correctly, it's not necessarily about your success as a businessman, but at the same time, you probably use those stories to help do that. But what is the motivation behind that book to really try to help people in their relationships and those type of things?
Well, over the many years and all the different blocks that I've walked around, whether it's in the service world of being on boards or having clients where I was their most trusted advisor, being a Little League coach or a Scoutmaster, I saw people, and just very, very fine people, stuck in some cases, stuck, maybe confused. And I realized that there were a lot of things I had learned along the way, and I wanted to share some of my observations. So there's a lot of tips, some techniques, some approaches to living life. I like to say that Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet said the big question is to be or not to be. And I say a much bigger question is how to be and how not to be. And that's really what my book is about.
Okay, and thriving. So that's the term to how can we really be and become. So
yeah.
In your concept of success, what is that? What does that mean to be successful in our lives?
Well, I push back as hard as I possibly can around what I think our society thinks of as success, which is really very narrowly focused around financial things. Yeah, it's important, of course, to do well and to be comfortable. But after that, the focus needs to really be internal. What is going to drive you forward? What's going to give you purpose? What's going to give you energy? Life is not about longevity. It's about vitality. So I think there are a lot of elements to this that are important to embrace. They include things like being grateful and being helpful to others. I like to say that love in a narrow romantic way is great if you have it, but a bigger way of holding love is to have love as a way of being, which is being kind and respectful and being generous and listening hard to somebody, being interested in somebody else.
Well, and at this point in time, as we see what's going on right now among campuses on the U.S. side, as totally opposite of what you were just saying. What's going on, and why on earth, in your opinion, are we having all of this type of animosity and anger and those type of things going on? And, I suppose people are trying to say, well, we're going to be successful at accomplishing this and so on and so forth. But what's the deal? What do you find is going on, at least in your opinion, as to why that's happening? And how does that fit into being able to learn how to really be, how to become, how to achieve a true success in our lives?
Well, I think thriving is really all about making choices. And when you hold on to the steering wheel and you're driving your own vehicle, you're deciding how fast to go and when to stop and when to turn right and left. And you include being positive. Being positive adds 8 to 9 years to your life. That what you can then stop doing is paying attention to cynicism and really a lot of negative stuff. We're living in a world that's full of cynicism. There's a lot of fear and anger out there as well, which is being fanned. There's a lot of flames blowing around that. And as you say, a lot of that's on college campuses as well. So I am aware of what's going on, but I don't drink from the fire hose of that stuff because it doesn't help me. It actually makes me unhappy. I think there's antidotes to that. I think civil discourse is something we can learn, we can practice. There's ways to go from debate, which is about making somebody right, and or wrong, and you're right, to more of a dialogue and trying to explore what do we have in common. These are really important techniques and behaviors to try to emulate. And I'm hoping actually to take my book onto the college campuses as a course, because I think there's a lot of elements to this in building relationships and living a valuable, fulfilling life that, young people or even people in continuing ed could appreciate holding on to.
Well, and how much do you feel like the subconscious imprints that we have received in our lives, and we all have gotten them from various sources and environmental, but how much do you think that is affecting our ability to really thrive in life and to experience, in my opinion at least, that joy, that happiness, that peace, that life is good?
They're headwinds. There's absolutely no question about it. They're headwinds. The media, the kind of common culture we have, even some of the fun things, movies and Hollywood and so on. Some of the music that's out there that's fairly popular are not necessarily very conducive to getting on, to reaching your potential, to really looking at yourself. The beginning of thriving is about knowing yourself. And that's not something everybody's willing to do. And it's not a one and done proposition either. You got to keep going back. The world changes, you change. And so you got to keep looking at those issues. Who am I? What's important to me? What kind of person do I want to be? I like talking about Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar, one of the great motivational speakers. He passed away about a dozen years ago. And he said, yeah, you want to be the kind of person where if somebody said something bad about you, no one would believe it. That's a fantastic way to live life. Nobody would believe that you were anything but a good person, an honorable person, a kind person. It's important. That's a
Well,
choice.
and I know that you have an undergraduate degree in psychology, which is fascinating because you go in all these different directions. So, how much of that has motivated you to go into this direction? Because you're really talking about, and to some degree, human behavior, psychology, those type of things. How did you get motivated in that direction?
Well, I have a degree in mathematics and psychology, and both of them have supported me very, very well throughout my investment banking career, doing very complex transactions for corporations. And the psychology plays in because my starting place has always been to understand my client's objectives. If we complete a transaction that misses those objectives, it may be checking the boxes in terms of the financial outcome, but it doesn't do what they need to do for them personally or for their employees, it can be not a good situation. And so I've been up close and personal with that issue for many, many decades. And I hold it near and dear to my heart. I want to do the best job I possibly can. This is back to this excellence thing. So I listen hard. I ask really tough questions, and if we don't have answers yet, that's okay. We'll keep talking about it. And I build a trusted relationship with people. They feel comfortable. I'm willing to be vulnerable, so I can tell a story or two about how I didn't know everything, and that wasn't easy for me to do in the early part of my career, but it's getting a lot easier now. And it allows them to open up and talk about what they're concerned about and the worries they have. A lot of privately held companies, being the CEO is a very lonely proposition. And when I come along and we're talking about maybe the most critical transaction of their business lives, wow, I get a lot of their attention.
I'll bet. And you talk about a lonely existence in business as a CEO, but how many do you think of us are experiencing in our lives a lonely existence without the business part?
Well, I don't have a really good grasp of that, frankly. I'm trying to inspire and encourage people to build relationships. There's an architecture to doing that. And you can make a relationship deeper and more enduring by doing certain things. And you can also hurt a relationship in lots of ways. So I'm out there talking about it. There's a lot of that in my book. So building relationships is an antidote for being lonely. But at the same time, I think it's really important to spend some time by yourself, maybe taking a walk, being in nature. I consider myself to be a fairly spiritual person because when I'm out in nature, I feel full of wonder. I'm in awe and I feel a lot of humility. Those are all really, really good things to have. And then I can bring it back to me, back into the relationships, back into the work I do with freshness, with a vigor.
Well, and you talk about building relationships, how you can build good relationships or you can actually ruin relationships. And you said that there's some specific, steps that you mentioned in your book. Could you share that with the audience? What are those steps for people to really build good relationships in their lives?
Well, I talk about it in the book as a ladder where you meet somebody and you're friendly. It's very casual. But then you see them the next time. Maybe they're a neighbor. Maybe they're part of some group you belong to. Maybe it's a religious institution. And you remember their name. It's really important. And if you have to ask for their name again, that's okay. It's easy to just say, oh, by the way, my name is Rand. Please remind me. I apologize. I've forgotten your name, Doug. Well, of course, I wouldn't say Doug at that point, but but then it begins building a little bit of a bridge. Then you ask them some questions. How long have you lived here? Tell me what you do when you're not here. What's of interest to you? You've always lived here. You just bit by bit. They're simple questions. They're easy. They're not very scary. It's kind of like your favorite color. People are usually willing to say my favorite color is green or blue or whatever it is. It's okay, but you build on that. And then you might get to the point of saying, well, let's do something together. You want to take a walk, or you want to have a cup of coffee, spend a little bit more time than just that 2 minutes, 3 minutes in a sort of casual passing each other by briefly. Then you get into deeper conversations. You share more about yourself, what's important to you, and you ask questions. You listen hard. And before you know it, if you're on that path, some people will say, hey, nah, thanks, I've got all the friends I need, or whatever you said is just, fine for you, but it's not of interest to me. That's fine. That's just terrific. That's okay. But other people will be attracted to you. And if you're positive, you're cheerful, you're appreciative, you become attractive. So people say, well, I do want to have that cup of coffee with you. Yes, I do want to take that little walk with you. That'd be fun. Sure.
So, how much of this, as you're observing this, and I know you talk a bit about how to strengthen your emotional health. How much of our emotions really affect our experience in life based on your experience, and how do we deal with that? Because there's so many people that I've interviewed who have worked through some horrific emotions and been able to reach a point now where they're doing some real good in the community. But at the same time, I've observed, and I'm sure you have too, that there are others who have allowed those emotions, those imprints, all those things that have happened in childhood and so on and so forth, to literally sabotage their experience in life, and they're not thriving. They find themselves as victims. In fact, they kind of fit into that whole victim mentality, which obviously is not, on an emotional quotient standpoint, is not where they want to be. So how do you find people can really develop their emotional strength and really reach a point in time where they're able to let go of all of that junk and stop the self-sabotaging that's going on?
Well, you've just highlighted so many critical ingredients to what emotional health is all about. And let me just go back and spend a minute with several of these.
Yes,
One
please.
is stopping self-sabotaging. This is not something that I have ever had to deal with, but I see a lot of other people do, and I continue to be a little surprised by it. Self-sabotaging is you're not even willing to get into the game. You're not going to apply for the job. You're not going to put your hand up and volunteer. You're not going to follow up when somebody says, oh, that'd be nice to exchange emails or whatever, and you say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't really think the person's interested in me. Well, there's so little risk to trying. If the answer is no, we don't need to. You're not a good candidate for our training program. They really were being just, superficial with you, and they're not going to follow up. You'll find that out soon enough. But maybe there's some nugget of goodies there. So stop self-sabotaging. Shooting yourself in the foot. It's the next worst thing to shooting yourself in the head. So that's one thing. A second thing is learning to forgive. And you talk about childhood and some of these things. A lot of the forgiveness that I hear people talking about goes way back, something that happened when they were kids. I talk about in the book the ACE test, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. It's a very simple test. You answer 10 questions, pretty much yes or no. Did any of these things happen before you were age 18? I scored a 3. And what's amazing to me about this is if you score 4 or more, there's an 80% chance that you will have lifelong mental or physical problems. So it's an important thing. We're getting better at early intervention with that. The other thing's interesting about the ACE test being and all these adverse childhood experiences is that, and we don't understand this yet, is there some people turn into dandelions. They can grow in the cracks of the sidewalk with no water. I'm a dandelion. My sister, I think, is an orchid, a little puff of wind, and she's blown over. Did we grow up in the same household? Yes, we did, but we're very different. We have a different experience of life and a different experience growing up and with our parents. So the whole issue of forgiving, you have to forget other people. You have to just work at it. It's not just snap your fingers necessarily, but you've got to get to the point. Otherwise, it's heavy rocks you're carrying around with you, and they can burden you for a long time. And you have to forgive yourself. Take a look, be honest. What mistakes have you made? Maybe they were intentional, maybe they were unintentional. You got to say to yourself, hey, what role did I play in that? And own up to it. And then apologize. Make restitution as best you can. But then at the end of the day, whichever kind of thing happened, you learn from your mistakes and you move on. So it's not in the way of you moving forward in life. And then the third thing is, you've mentioned this also, Doc Doug, is letting go. I think a lot of my business success had to do with me being in control. I laid out the program. I knew what was going on. I hired the lawyers. I, dealt with, the accountants. I had a nice relationship with my clients. So they said, well, what should we do next? All that stuff, being in control. I kind of ran my family that way too. But then about a dozen years ago, as my kids were getting married and doing extremely well in life, they were making choices that I would not have made for them. I would not have made for myself, but they were working out for them. And I said, well, they're not asking me my opinion. Well, nor should they necessarily have to. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So I began a process of learning to let go. That's been one of the hardest things I had to do. And I like doing this little exercise. If you want to do it with me, that'd be great.
Okay.
So you hold your fist up and you're holding on to something. And you see your knuckles. You see the white knuckles there, and you're holding on. You're holding on tight. This might have been going on for weeks or years or decades, and you haven't been able to let go. Then you turn your fist over and you see the knuckles on the other side. Same thing, you've not been able to let go. But now you realize, wait a minute, I'm in charge. I am powerful. I can make some choices. I'm going to decide right now to let go of that. You open your hand, you wiggle your fingers and your thumb, and you let go of that thing, and your hand rises because that weight is no longer so burdensome. So I started doing this about a dozen years ago. When I started doing it, I was doing it with some regularity. And now I'm doing it, I don't know, every couple of months. But when I find myself, struggling around letting something go, because I'm not in control, I'm not in charge, somebody's not asking my opinion, or my opinion doesn't matter, I do that little exercise and it helps me. I laugh at myself.
Well, and that's just a mini exercise. Have you ever gotten into meditation, or have you observed people being able to really learn to let go, to forgive, to go through that whole process through some type of form of meditation or therapy or whatever that happens to be? And actually, your fist example really is a short form of meditation and consciousness and mindfulness.
Yes. Well, I agree. I think the whole mindfulness world, in whichever form that takes place, and there are different forms. For me, I think it's primarily being outdoors in nature, and often by myself, and just slowing things down and watching some little bug, watch some flower unfolding, and just I can almost feel my heart slowing down, and breathing and saying to myself, life's good. So
and when you do that,
yeah, I think you're totally right. This is a really important way of taking care of yourself. Rest rest. People don't get enough rest. I really advocate taking a day off. I don't care how busy you are. I've had a hugely busy, set of things going on in my life for decades. Take one day off a week. No internet, no phone. Yes, eat some yummy food, be with friends, listen to some music, no shopping. Man.
Yeah, and get away from your life that you've been running around in, which is not necessarily where you want to be. One of the things that I find fascinating, and I get criticized many times, from different people. I find that I just love to study. I have a curiosity that I just can't stop. So, I'm sitting here in Thailand, and all of a sudden I'm studying Buddhism, and I'm comparing it to all these other backgrounds that I have, and so on and so forth. And, as you say, you move forward with certain degrees, but then you continue to study and get curious about this and about that. What have you found, if anything, is there a value to curiosity, to really wanting to be a lifelong learner, not only in new things, but also being able to observe your life in general?
It is so significant. I'm so delighted you brought that up. Being curious makes life fun, for one thing. You just see something, maybe you've seen it, well, you didn't really see it. It's happened, it's come by you before, and you really didn't really notice it. It's kind of like a new word. That word's been there, but I wasn't paying attention. So, but it could be brand new as well. That's all part of it. But you say to yourself, what's going on here? Why? How does that work? How did that get to be? What's the history of this? Being curious is super makes life so much fun. It's like, who goes on a vacation without discovering some new stuff? And it's also, as an added bonus, fantastically valuable in terms of suspending judgment and in dealing with conflict resolution. Because if you're curious, you're no longer engaged in the fight. You're no longer saying, I'm right and you're wrong. You're saying, I'm curious now. Why did you say that? Haven't thought that way myself, but tell me more. I'm curious about how you came to that point of view. So curiosity is huge. Actually, there's been studies done that there are 7 personal qualities that lead to life satisfaction and achievement. And curiosity is one of those 7. That's how important it is.
Well, and as we get that way, then how do we become curious about our own life and the mistakes that we've made, and what do we do about that?
Maybe the starting point for that is some self-esteem, some self-love. And what you might have to overcome is some mistakes you made. And you might have to sort of say, hey, I'm not a perfect person. I'm getting better. That quote about Zig Ziglar, 20, 30 years ago, there would probably have been people who said, well, I have some bad things to say, and they're probably all true. Well, I think now, moving along, working at being a better person all the time, that population is shrunk a lot. I would like to believe nobody is saying something bad about me. So I think this is a critical ingredient to living a good, fulfilling life.
Well, and there's so many books have been written about failure and all of those type of things. But when we talk about curiosity, and I appreciate what you said about it, because when we really think about going back and realizing that mistakes that we've made or experiences that we've had that may have been in our control, or maybe they were not within our control. And yet curiosity allows us to go in and really start to analyze. And then you can come from the perspective of either victimhood or the perspective of what, out of curiosity, what what value was there in that? What did I learn? What has this helped me in any way create a different perspective of life, a different, affinity for life? What are your thoughts on that, and how does that work?
Well, I again, this is one of these topics I'm so glad you brought up. I think the sense of being a victim is, I don't think I've yet to meet a person who felt like a victim where it was doing much for them. I think again, the antidote for that sense of being a victim, I think it relates a lot to being powerless. And so if you can say, I'm responsible, yes, this happened. It wasn't in my control, but what is in my control is how I feel about it and what I do next. That is in my control. That's a really huge thing. And you can also, besides taking responsibility for those things, you can also make some choices along the way as to, how you want to show up again and again. Being curious about yourself and feeling good about yourself, breathing in some self-love, and being honest. I mean, I don't think there's anybody who's perfect. I haven't met them. If you have, let me know. But that's not the way life works. People, sometimes they bumble along, and sometimes they do good stuff, and then they don't do something well for a while. They hurt somebody, and then they move on. They mess up. That's the nature of things.
Well, and you talk, I think, in your book a little bit about transitions. Now, you have had the experience of different transitions in your life, okay, and we all have, depending on age and so forth. But you've had those transitions, and from what I can gather, you have been very much in control and have been at cause in doing those transitions. I think there are many people who are faced with transitions that are outside of their control. It just happens, or, in general, things change in life. And do you find that people really struggle with that? And do you talk about that in the book? And how do people really manage some of those transitions in their life?
I definitely do talk about it because life is full of beginnings and endings, and in the middle of those two are transitions. And what's around transitions are a lot of emotions. There's fear. You knew what was going on before. It may not have been great, and that's maybe why transition is coming up, something new. But you can hold that in an angry way about what you're leaving behind, and you're leaving a company, and you're very upset with your old boss. And you could also be very fearful about what's coming next. That these are powerful, very powerful emotions. So you got to come to terms. What are you feeling? Take some time. I highly recommend journaling. What am I doing? A lot of emotions are not just clean one type of thing. There's multiple things going on, multiple emotions all wrapped up in a gooey, messy thing. You got to take the time to separate those out, figure out what's going on. How are you feeling about it? So at some point, as you make progress with this, you can go back to who you are. What do you stand for? What are your values? What is your purpose here? Um, and that will then realign you, hopefully align you with what the next step is. And you create some options for yourself. And then there's a lot of planning, a lot of the implementation around the next step. If you're thoughtful about this, you're looking inside, you're looking at yourself, not what somebody else says you should do. Listen to that, and that voice. Talk to yourself, not listen to yourself. Talk to yourself with some positive things to say, and create some options. Analyze the options. What's going to work best? What's going to work best for you, maybe for your family? And then you say, okay, everything is an experiment in life. It may work out really well from day one, and it may have to take some tweaks to get to the place where it's really humming along. That's okay. That's okay.
Well, and it's interesting as I came out here to Thailand and have sought to at least find some people who speak English, and so looking at the expat community and so forth, it's been fascinating to meet different people, and I've developed some great friends. And obviously, they're at that point of retirement or close to retirement. They may be still leaving and doing a little bit of work from time to time. But one of the things I've observed for them, and even for me as I'm out here, is what do I do? Because, I'm no longer doing this profession. I'm no longer doing that profession, which I had done after the first profession and so forth. And yet what I see a lot happening is, and not with everyone, but I see them having, maybe a good day or maybe just relaxing and not doing much. And then in the evening, they're all going to the bars and literally drinking themselves silly. And I look at that, and I think to some degree it's cultural, but in other areas, and I struggle with this sometimes. Is what do I do? I'm no longer doing these other things, and I'm quote retired. What do I do? How do I age well in an environment that really does not necessarily encourage me to do that, and I have to actually take personal responsibility to do that. But how do we do that and being able to continue to live that life of thriving even when we've gotten to the point where we're retired?
Yeah. Well, I should say that thriving is the climate and not the weather. So it's the average over time. Anybody can have a bad day. So I just want to lay that out. The second thing that's really important is to make some choices about who you're spending time with. And if you're spending time with a whole lot of people who are retired and really have no purpose and are kind of flat, there's a good chance you're going to kind of follow suit before long. So it's important to surround yourself with some people who are doing interesting things that you're interested in yourself, back to the curiosity thing. And it's important, again, to know yourself. What kinds of things do you find interesting? Are you reading? Are you learning something new? Moving off to Thailand is a fantastic thing. Bravo. There's so many things that are new, I'm sure, for you. And that's good. Now, you mentioned the expat community. I'm guessing that's because that's English, and that's understandable. But part of the expat community could also be people from Europe or other parts of Asia or something, and they could communicate well enough with you to make the time with them really good. One of the things I say about aging well is to have friends of all ages. That's rare. Most folks have friends plus or minus their own age, 5 years, one way or the other of their own age. Very common. You have so many more things that are familiar, music, the growing up, the period of time you're growing up. All those things make it easy. And a lot of people probably have friends from when they were in school. And it's all these decades later, but they made those friends then, and that's who their friends are now. Well, I say, okay, I understand that. I'm not naive about this stuff. But if you have friends of all ages, somebody who's half your age or somebody who's 10 or 20 years older, what's that doing for you? You got to learn some new language, different vocabulary, different ways of talking about things. It's the way they see the world is going to show up in different ways. And that's interesting, and it keeps you fresh if you're asking questions and you're interested in them. And that's the whole crux of this, friends of all ages.
Yes, and fortunately, I head back to the U.S. at the end of the month, so it's going to be end of May. Yeah, so it's summer there and winter here. But what I find interesting, as you say, is, and I love that concept, is having friends of various ages, because it really keeps you alert. It keeps you thinking. And I have 4 kids, and so they are my friends as well as children, as you have also. But it's interesting to get into those conversations with them, and and really listening and realizing that, wow, their modality of thinking, the way that they're approaching things, as you said with your kids, they're doing things you would never do yourself. And yet, that really does keep that curiosity, and that keeps that whole awareness alive.
I want to add another part of this that I think is really important is sort of your self attitude. You mentioned people who retired, and this is a cultural concept. I remember my dad's turning 102 next Sunday, and he worked until he was 90. He loved his work. He got so much positive feedback. He was helping so many people. He never wanted to stop. He finally had to because he couldn't see very well and he couldn't hear very well. So this concept of being old, retirement for a lot of people is just basically falling off a cliff. And one of the things that people said they love about my book is that the appendix has a paragraph on 75 books that I've read that really impacted me. And one of those books is Younger Next Year. It's a fantastic book. I really recommend it to your listeners. It's two people have come together, a doctor, an internist, and a fellow who was a retired lawyer, but who's very active. And one chapter is by the lawyer. The next chapter is sort of the medicine and the physiology of aging. And basically the premise is, no, you do not have to be older next year. There are things you can do, and part of it's a mindset of saying no. Having friends who are a lot younger helps you. You're not going to show up as the old guy. No, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be coming with something interesting to say, maybe a joke.
Well, and my dad worked till he was 86, so that was amazing too. So you're right. It just, there's that motivation to say, you know what, I'm not going to let go just because I'm aging, and I think that becomes key. So as we close, and this is a tough thing to do, I know, but I'd love for you to just share a thought that you have that you'd like to share with the audience, to just kind of sum up what you really are trying to get across and the message that you're trying to get across to the audience.
I think the central message in the work I'm doing now and in my book is about the power, the enormous power we have to make choices, which will get us on the road to thriving. These are choices of how we spend our time, who we spend our time with, and even our emotions. That might surprise people, but we have choices about our emotions, and especially how we hold on to them.
I love it. And how do people find your book?
Thank you. Well, you can go. It's of course at Amazon, but it's also at all the independent stores. I will be doing an audiobook this summer. I'm excited about that, but it's in ebook, paperback, and hardcover. And you can also go to my website, my book website, randselig.com, randselig.com. You can order the book there. You can learn more about me, more about what the book is about, some amazing testimonials, a list of podcasts. I'll add yours when it comes out, Doug. And it's great. It's great. So you can go either way. And you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Well, and the book that you were talking about, what was the name of that book again that you said was among the list that you had given?
Yes. Younger Next Year.
Younger Next Year. Okay. And you talk about Audible. I assume you're going to do that. It's great. I wonder how many people really think about the fact that as they're driving to work, and particularly those that are commuting in a large city, for an hour or so, and they're just listening to music, they're listening to news and so forth, how much can be gained by listening to books. I try to walk, each morning and for an hour or so. And what I find is if I've got my AirPods in and I am listening to a book, I'm learning, I'm doing something very effectively. And I think, you have brought up such an interesting thing about how important it is to be curious, to read, to continue to discover things about different areas.
I like what you're saying, Dr. Doug, and but I also want to say that, and somebody asked me this at one of my book talks recently. He said, "Well, when I go for a walk, I'm always got my earbuds in and I'm listening to a podcast or a book, and is that okay?" And I said, "Yeah, learning, being interested is of course a fantastic thing, but occasionally take the earbuds out." Just slow down, listen to yourself, just enjoy things. Be with yourself, embrace that, and then take a look at that little something going on. Just stop and look at that amazing world we live in. Is so many fascinating Mother Nature's done this amazing thing. Just absorb it.
Stop. Yes, just stop and enjoy the environment. I totally agree with you. Well, Rand, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate it. This is fascinating. And folks, I hope that you will, really look at this. And if you find this interesting, get that book and really see if you can discover some things about yourself and find a way to really thrive in your life in a much different way than perhaps you've been experiencing. This is Dr. Doug saying thank you so much for listening. Hope you'll join us again soon.